Before the bombs fell on October 23, 2077, Vault-Tec had already sealed 122 underground shelters across America. The company sold them as humanity's last hope. What they actually built was the largest controlled experiment in human suffering ever conceived. For 200 years, vault dwellers lived and died inside machines designed to break them. Some vaults flooded residents with psychoactive drugs. Others pitted them against each other in rigged elections, or woke them in shifts across centuries, so no generation ever met the next. A few vaults worked exactly as advertised, but only so Vault-Tec could compare the data. This is the full timeline. Every vault, every experiment, every lie Vault-Tec told on its way to the Great War. We're starting in the 2050s, when the old world still had power in the grid and food on the shelves, and ending in the 2280s, when the last vault doors finally opened. You're going to see how a pre-war corporation convinced the United States government to bankroll 122 social experiments under the cover of nuclear preparedness. But the story doesn't start with the bombs. It starts decades earlier, when the world still had a chance. In 2051, America looked like the future it had always promised itself. Fusion power lit the cities. Chrysler Motors sold atomic sedans to middle-class families in the suburbs. You could buy a Mr. Handy robot to mow your lawn for $8,799, and Nuka-Cola came in 15 flavors. The anxiety was there, sure. Civil defense posters reminded you to duck and cover. Radiation King televisions played newsreels about Chinese aggression in the Pacific, but people still went to work, raised kids, paid mortgages. The government still printed money that meant something. The cracks had been forming for years. Oil production peaked in 2050 and started dropping. Europe was already rationing fuel. The Middle East had gone silent after a limited nuclear exchange in 2054 turned the region into a crater. But in America, fusion kept the lights on just long enough to convince people the crisis was somewhere else. The real cracks appeared when the oil finally ran out. By 2052, the European Commonwealth was fighting over the last petroleum reserves in the Middle East. Within 12 months, the alliance collapsed. France and Germany turned on each other. Italy went dark. The United Nations, already irrelevant, dissolved completely in 2053. America watched from across the ocean and made its own calculations. In 2059, Canadian resources became too valuable to leave in Canadian hands. U.S. troops crossed the border in June. By 2076, Canada was annexed. Its citizens shot in the streets for protesting. Its forests clear-cut for fuel. The wars weren't ideological anymore. They were arithmetic. China needed oil. America needed uranium and rare earth metals. Both needed food that wasn't growing because the topsoil was dying. The peace held only because neither side had a guarantee their missiles would end the other before the counterstrike erased them. While the world tore itself apart over oil, one corporation saw a different kind of opportunity. Vault-Tec Industries positioned itself as America's savior. Founded in 2054, the company secured its first government shelter contract within 3 years, and by the 2060s, it had become the face of nuclear preparedness. Billboards across every major city showed smiling families descending into gleaming underground havens. The promise was simple: when the bombs fell, Vault-Tec would keep you safe. The contracts were massive. Each vault cost billions to construct, and Vault-Tec built them everywhere, under major cities, in remote mountain ranges, beneath the Mojave Desert. The company employed 30,000 workers at its peak, all sworn to secrecy about vault locations and specifications. Security was tight. Questions were discouraged. The marketing was relentless and weirdly cheerful. Vault Boy, the company's grinning mascot, appeared on everything from lunchboxes to civil defense posters. Vault-Tec sponsored school programs, published preparedness guides, and ran nationwide lottery campaigns for vault spots. To the public, they were the good guys, the corporation that cared enough to save civilization. But the contracts told a different story. Buried in classified annexes were specifications that made no sense for survival shelters. Observation equipment, social stressor protocols, genetic testing facilities. The vaults were being built to precise experimental parameters, each one designed around variables the public would never see. The vaults were never meant to save anyone. In 2077, while Vault-Tec courted families with brochures, a smaller group met behind closed doors. They called themselves the Enclave, though no charter or founding document exists in any archive. Members included sitting cabinet officials, joint chiefs, CEOs of defense contractors, and Vault-Tec's own executive board. They met on oil rigs, in secure sublevels, anywhere records couldn't follow. Their assessment was cold. The war was coming, probably within the year, and the old America wouldn't survive it, but a new one could. The Enclave saw themselves as the rightful heirs, the minds disciplined enough to make hard calls, the bloodlines worth preserving, the vision to rebuild a purified nation from the ashes. Democracy had failed. They wouldn't. They commandeered resources the public never knew existed. Control Station Enclave, a Poseidon Energy oil rig off the California coast, was retrofit into a mobile command base. Secure sites were established nationwide: Raven Rock in Pennsylvania, the White Spring Bunker in West Virginia, Adams Air Force Base outside D.C. Each location stocked with supplies, weapons, and personnel vetted for ideological purity. The Enclave didn't plan to hide in vaults with civilians. They'd ride out the war in hardened command centers, then emerge to a blank slate. But first, they needed data. How humans adapt to isolation, radiation, genetic stress, social collapse. They needed to know what worked before they rebuilt. They needed subjects for what came next. On March 6, 2054, the U.S. government announced Project Safehouse. 122 vaults would be constructed across America, each capable of sheltering 500 to 1,000 citizens indefinitely. The price tag, $400 billion, funded by defense appropriations and corporate partnerships. Construction began within months. Vault-Tec promised every vault would be operational before 2080. The application process was a lottery by design. Families submitted forms detailing occupation, health history, skills, and genetic background. Vault-Tec claimed random selection, but approvals followed patterns. Certain zip codes, certain professions, certain demographics were overrepresented. Nobody noticed. The chance to survive was enough. By 2077, 15 million Americans had applied for just 122,000 spots. Each vault received a number and a mandate. Vault 8 in Nevada, general population, control setup. Vault 13 in Southern California, long-term isolation study. Vault 87 in D.C., viral research installation. The assignments were logged in classified appendices, accessible only to Enclave liaisons and senior Vault-Tec staff. To the construction crews and future residents, every vault looked the same: rows of cryopods or living quarters, hydroponics bays, water purification, enough supplies for decades. The lie was structural. Vault-Tec publicly promised safety for all, but the budgets told the truth. Most vaults were underfunded, their systems designed to fail at specific intervals. Equipment was omitted, redundancies were skipped, and oversight staff received sealed instructions to be opened only after the bombs fell. The whole program was a shell. 122 vaults to house America's hope. Only 17 vaults were designed to actually work. The real vaults were laboratories. Vault 11 would force residents to sacrifice one person annually or face extermination by the vault's own security system. Vault 27 was designed to hold 2,000 people despite having space and supplies for 400. Vault 68 housed 999 men and 1 woman. Vault 77 contained 1 man and a crate of puppets. These weren't design flaws, they were protocols, typed into binders with clinical precision and filed under Project Safehouse. Isolation duration studies, radiation exposure trials, drug dependency baselines, genetic divergence tracking, under controlled inbreeding conditions. Every vault had a variable to test, a hypothesis to prove, and a population that didn't know they were the experiment. Vault 12's door was engineered not to close, guaranteeing lethal radiation exposure to every resident. Vault 106 pumped psychoactive drugs through the air filtration system 10 days after sealing. The overseer of Vault 36 received food supplies contaminated with a pest that would destroy the entire stock within months. Starvation by design. Vault-Tec didn't build shelters. They built petri dishes, each one a question written in steel and human suffering. But someone had to design these experiments, and their reasons went deeper than science. Dr. Stanislaus Braun sat on the Vault-Tec Societal Preservation Program Committee. Before the war, he held 53 patents in human-computer interface technology and had never apologized for anything. He authored the Vault 112 simulation protocol personally, a virtual reality prison where he could reset, torture, and reshape the minds of 85 frozen residents for as long as the reactor held out. The proposal passed, without revision. The men and women who designed the Vault experiments weren't mad scientists cackling in labs. They were consultants, department heads, enclave liaisons with security clearances, and families in Georgetown. They met in conference rooms. They cited sociology papers. They framed mass psychological torture as pioneering research into humanity's adaptive limits under extreme duress, necessary data for the coming colonization of new worlds. Vault 92 would use white noise and subliminal suggestion to program civilian residents into combat-ready soldiers. Vault 87 would test evolutionary mutation via forced evolutionary virus exposure on the unwilling. These protocols were printed, circulated, approved by committee, and locked in secure filing cabinets with the same bureaucratic efficiency as the federal budget. One signature, one stamp, one more nightmare filed under national security. The Enclave provided the clearances, Vault-Tec provided the infrastructure, and together they built a machine designed to measure how much suffering a human being could endure before breaking. While they planned, the world outside reached the breaking point. On January 10, 2066, Chinese forces landed on the Alaskan coastline. The target was the last proven oil reserve on the continent, the Anchorage Pipeline, and America's entire strategic fuel supply. Within 3 months, the People's Liberation Army controlled everything north of the Brooks Range. The United States military, already stretched across a resource war that had burned through Europe and the Middle East, mobilized what it could. The Anchorage reclamation became a meat grinder. Temperatures hit -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Supply lines froze. Conventional forces stalled in the tundra until 2067, when West-Tec delivered the T-45D power armor to the front. 7 feet tall, hydraulic-assisted, armed with a Gatling laser. A single soldier in T-45 could hold a position against 20 men. By 2069, America had pushed the Chinese back to the coast. It didn't stop there. In 2074, U.S. forces invaded mainland China. The war metastasized. Both nations burned through their reserves, their allies, their propaganda. The nuclear arsenals sat ready, silos staffed, launch keys turned to standby. Riots consumed American cities as food and fuel vanished. Martial law locked down Boston, Washington, and Los Angeles. The Chinese front collapsed in early 2077, but by then, collapse was the only direction left. By 2077, Everyone knew the bombs were coming. They just didn't know who would drop them first. October 23, 2077, 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The detection sirens went off across every remaining American city. Nobody ran. There was nowhere left to run to. The exchange lasted 2 hours. NORAD tracked 3,234 confirmed detonations in the first 40 minutes. China hit the West Coast, the Midwest Industrial Corridor, and Washington, D.C. America hit Beijing, Shanghai, and the Yangtze River Valley. By noon, both nations had ceased to exist. 400 million people died in the initial strikes. Another 2 billion would follow in the weeks after, from radiation, starvation, and the collapse of every system that kept civilization running. We still don't know who launched first. The records burned with everything else. But here's what we do know. Vault-Tec sealed their doors at 5:47 a.m., 4 hours before the sirens. 4 hours early. 122 vaults across America. 122,000 spots, give or take. The lottery system selected residents years in advance based on location, occupation, and a payment plan most families couldn't afford. If you lived within 20 miles of a vault and had $1,000 for the entrance fee, you had a shot. When the sirens hit, 89% of lottery winners never made it to their assigned vault. Traffic jammed every highway within minutes. The ones who did arrive found crowds already there, thousands deep, pressed against blast doors that wouldn't open. Some vaults let people in until they hit capacity. Others followed protocol and sealed early. Vault 12 in Bakersfield opened its doors to everyone. Vault 11 in New Mexico held a vote. Vault 101 near D.C. closed with 93 residents inside, designed for 500. Outside, families who'd paid for 20 years watched the countdown timers through reinforced glass. The divide started there. Vault dwellers and everyone else, the ones who made it inside, thought they were saved. Vault 13 sat under a mountain in Southern California, 200 miles from Los Angeles. It sealed at 6:34 a.m. with 1,000 residents, a full manifest, and supplies calculated for 200 years of isolation. The door wouldn't open again until 2277. That was the plan. Vault 13 was a control vault. No experiments, no variables, no hidden agendas in the fine print. Just people, resources, and time. It's the only vault in the entire network designed to actually protect its inhabitants, long-term, and then release them back to the surface when conditions stabilized. The overseer was a man named Jacorin, 34 years old on the day the bombs fell, a mid-level Vault-Tec administrator who believed in the mission. He ran the vault by the book: strict rationing, mandatory rotation schedules, education for the children born underground. For 84 years, it worked exactly as intended. Vault 13 became the baseline, the one success story in a sea of horrors. Most vaults didn't have that luxury. Vault 12 sat under Bakersfield, California. Its construction records showed a single anomaly: vault door mechanism VD12A, logged as defective during final inspection. Vault-Tec shipped it anyway. The door never sealed, not completely. A gap of maybe 3 or 4 inches remained after the locks engaged, just wide enough for the outside world to creep in. Radiation poured through that crack for months, then years, bathing every resident in a slow, invisible burn. By 2083, the transformation was undeniable. Skin peeled and browned like old leather. Hair fell out in clumps. Eyes went milky, then cleared again with an unnatural yellow tint. The residents weren't dying. They were changing, cell by cell, into something that shouldn't be able to survive. They called themselves ghouls, a name borrowed from old horror movies. Most kept their minds intact through the process. Some didn't. The radiation changed people in ways no one predicted. Ghoulification isn't just radiation damage. It's radiation damage intersecting with trace amounts of FEV that had leaked into the water table and atmosphere before the war. The virus mutates cells, makes them resistant to decay. Gamma radiation triggers the transformation, rewrites DNA in real time. Why some people go feral and others stay sentient, nobody knows for sure. Genetic factors, radiation dosage, pre-existing conditions, maybe just luck. A feral ghoul loses higher brain function within weeks, driven only by hunger and rage. A sentient ghoul watches their body rot for decades while their mind stays sharp, remembering everything they used to be. The horror isn't the transformation itself, it's the mirror. It's watching your nose fall off on a Tuesday morning and going to scavenge for food anyway, because you're not dead and you're not going to be. By 2090, ghouls were scattered across the wasteland, congregating in irradiated zones where smoothskins wouldn't follow. Necropolis, the glow, subway tunnels under DC. They became a permanent fixture of post-war life, neither alive nor dead in any meaningful sense. But ghouls weren't the strangest thing crawling out of the ashes. In 2076, Vault-Tec research facility outside Los Angeles completed development of the Pan-Immunity Virion project. The goal was simple: create a virus that could rewrite human DNA to resist biological and chemical weapons. They called it FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus. FEV worked by hijacking cellular reproduction, forcing rapid mutations guided by the virus's programming. Test subjects at Mariposa military base showed incredible results: increased muscle mass, accelerated healing, immunity to radiation and disease. They also showed decreased cognitive function, heightened aggression, and sterility. The military didn't care about the side effects. They cared about super soldiers. By October 2077, Mariposa held vats of refined FEV in reinforced containment, along with 2 years of test data on human subjects. Vault-Tec's main lab stored earlier iterations, less stable but still potent. Both sites were designed to survive a nuclear strike. They weren't designed to survive what came after: earthquakes, structural collapse, groundwater seepage. When the bombs fell, they broke open containers that were never meant to see daylight. The FEV leak at Vault-Tec wasn't the only containment failure that day. 400 miles south, Mariposa military base sat intact beneath the mushroom clouds. The experimental vats in the lower levels were undamaged, still humming with power from the base's independent reactor. 4 days before the bombs fell, Captain Roger Maxson and his men had staged a rebellion there. They'd discovered what the science team was really doing: dosing military prisoners with FEV, documenting the mutations, then executing the subjects. Maxson executed the lead scientists, declared desertion over radio, and waited for a response that never came. October 23rd arrived before the Army could react. Maxson's unit survived in the hardened facility, then evacuated 2 days later when radiation readings dropped. They took supplies, weapons, and records. They left the FEV vats running, sealed behind 3 feet of reinforced steel in sub-level 4. The base sat empty for decades, its blast doors locked, its ventilation system cycling stale air through abandoned corridors. The vats kept their samples at exactly 36.5 degrees Celsius, waiting. Decades later, someone would find those vats and use them. The first winter lasted 3 years. Ash clouds wrapped the planet, blocking 80% of sunlight and dropping global temperatures by 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Most plant life died in the first 18 months. Most animals followed within 36. Survivors on the surface learned fast or died. You could drink irradiated water if you had no choice. You'd just die slower. You could eat rats and insects if you cooked them long enough. You could trust no one outside your immediate group, because food was worth killing for, and there wasn't enough to share. By 2080, the ash had settled enough for weak sunlight to return. Hardy weeds pushed through the dust. Tiny settlements formed around pre-war ruins, a gas station, a grocery store, anything with 4 walls still standing. Maybe 15, 20 people. Most didn't last a year. The wasteland had rules now. Radiation pooled in craters and never left. Storms carried fallout hundreds of miles. Water was worth more than gold. Medicine worth more than water. Violence was the common language. In California, a few settlements grew large enough to endure. Vault 15 was designed to hold 1,000 people. By 2097, it held 1,400. Overcrowding, failing recyclers, and factional disputes forced the overseer to open the door 23 years early. The inhabitants scattered into 4 groups, each following a different leader into the wastes. One group, led by a man named Aradesh, found a location 12 miles northeast, with accessible groundwater and soil that wasn't completely poisoned. They built shelters from sheet metal and vault materials, planted seeds salvaged from the vault's agricultural bay, and called it Shady Sands. Population 43. Within a decade, it was the largest stable settlement in California. Aradesh organized crop rotations, dug irrigation ditches, and established a council to mediate disputes. By 2142, they were growing corn, beans, and wheat. By 2155, they had 200 residents, a school, and trade routes to 6 other settlements. They didn't have walls yet, or a formal army, or a constitution. Just fields that produced food, laws that people mostly followed, and proof that civilization could grow back from nothing. Another vault produced something far less hopeful. Vault 8 opened on schedule in 2091, exactly 10 years after the bombs fell. Unlike Vault 13, this wasn't a mistake. Vault 8 was a control vault, one of the 17 designed to function exactly as advertised, and it came equipped with something most vaults never received: a Garden of Eden creation kit. The GECK was Vault-Tec's miracle device, a terraforming package containing fertilizer, seeds, soil supplements, and a cold fusion power unit, capable of transforming irradiated wasteland into arable land in weeks. Vault 8's residents used it to build Vault City, a settlement that grew into a genuine city-state within 50 years, complete with working power grids, medical technology, and anti-aging treatments derived from pre-war research. But prosperity bred isolation. Vault City's citizens saw themselves as the last true inheritors of pre-war civilization, genetically pure and technologically superior. They enslaved wastelanders, refused trade with outsiders, and built their entire culture around the idea that the vault door separated the worthy from the damned. The GECK had given them everything except a reason to care about anyone else. Most vaults never received a GECK, and their experiments began in earnest. Vault 11's experiment was elegantly simple. Every year, the residents held an election. The winner became overseer, and then the vault's security system executed them. If they refused to sacrifice an overseer, the system announced everyone would die. For years, they complied. The first overseer was a volunteer, a man who believed his death might be the last. It wasn't. The second was elected by a slim majority. The third was chosen by a faction that had seized control of the voting blocks. By the fourth and fifth, the vault had descended into political warfare, with alliances forming specifically to condemn rivals to death. It took decades before the remaining residents, exhausted and surrounded by the graves of their friends, finally refused. They waited for the gas to flood the corridors, for the turrets to activate. Instead, a pre-recorded message congratulated them. The true test, Vault-Tec explained, was whether they'd value human life over self-preservation. Only 5 of the original population lived to hear it. Some experiments measured morality, others measured endurance. Vault 27 was designed to fail in weeks, not years. Vault-Tec sealed 2,000 people inside a space engineered for 500. No entertainment systems, no private quarters, 1 bathroom for the entire population. The air recyclers strained under the load, and the temperature climbed above 85 degrees Fahrenheit within days. The first murder happened on day 6. By week 3, the vault had fractured into armed factions fighting over access to the water purifier and the single functioning toilet. The atrium became a mass grave. Families turned on each other. Within 6 weeks, the screaming stopped. When the door finally opened, years later, scavengers found nothing but silence. Bodies stacked in corridors, bloodstains on every wall, a few scattered skeletons near the exit. People who'd clawed their way to the door but couldn't override the lock. Vault-Tec's files called it an accelerated societal collapse study. The data was never retrieved. Not every vault had the luxury of time to fail slowly. Richard Gray fell into the vats on January 7, 2102. He'd been part of an exploration team poking around Mariposa, looking for salvage. The fall shattered both legs and dumped him into several feet of greenish liquid that hadn't evaporated in the 25 years since the bombs. FEV doesn't kill quickly, it rewrites. Gray's logs, recorded through a jury-rigged terminal interface he managed to drag himself to, detail 30 days of transformation. Skin splitting and reforming, bones lengthening, then fusing. His body spreading across the floor of the vat chamber like a fungus, incorporating dead tissue, metal, circuitry. By day 23, he'd stopped using the first person. By day 30, the logs refer to something called the Unity. What crawled out of that vat wasn't Richard Gray anymore. It was a biological network, with Gray's memories at the core, fused to the vault's mainframe, able to think in parallel across dozens of semi-autonomous tissue clusters. The master spent 59 years in that vault, studying the FEV data the military had left behind, experimenting on animals, on himself, refining the process. He understood what Vault-Tec and the government never quite grasped. FEV wasn't a weapon, it was a ladder. He spent the next decades building an army. The process took 8 hours. Strap a human into the dipping harness, lower them into a vat of aerosolized FEV for controlled exposure. Wait. What came out stood between 10 and 12 feet tall, weighed 350 to 800 pounds, depending on the base specimen, and registered pain as a distant advisory signal instead of an emergency. Super mutants kept human-level intelligence if the source was unirradiated and genetically viable. Sterile, yes. The FEV burned out reproductive function in the first 48 hours of conversion, but stronger, tougher, and functionally immune to disease and further radiation. The master called it the Unity. One species, one purpose. No conflict over resources or territory or tribe. No racism when everyone's green. No war when everyone's built to survive the wasteland without competing. He saw it as salvation, the only way humanity wouldn't tear itself apart in the irradiated ruins. Early experiments failed more than they succeeded. Wastelanders carried too many rads, too much genetic damage. They came out of the vats as towering, mindless brutes. Vault dwellers, though, vault dwellers converted clean. The master needed vaults. By 2161, his army was strong enough to march. Raiding parties started hitting settlements in 255. Small at first, a dozen mutants sweeping through a caravan stop or a farming commune. Survivors described them as methodical. They didn't loot, didn't burn. They took people, loaded them into transports, and headed east toward the mountains. Mariposa became the conversion center, but the master established forward bases at the LA Vault, at the cathedral in the Boneyard, at a dozen secured locations across Southern California. Towns woke up to find mutant patrols on the perimeter. By midday, the town was empty. 200 people just gone. The Unity didn't negotiate. It didn't make demands. It simply explained, once, that conversion was inevitable and resistance extended suffering. Some settlements tried to fight. Conventional weapons didn't do much against 800-pound soldiers who shrugged off small arms fire and kept advancing. Traders stopped running certain routes. Entire regions of the map went dark. The hub started hearing stories about green giants and a voice that spoke in your head. NCR wasn't big enough yet to do anything about it. The Brotherhood had gone underground. Vault-13 noticed when their water chip broke at the worst possible time. The Overseer didn't hold a lottery. He picked one person, handed them a Pip-Boy 2000, and said, "You've got 120 days. Find a replacement chip, or everyone in Vault-13 dies of thirst." December 5th, 2161. The vault door opened for the first time in 84 years. One resident walked out into the Mojave wasteland with a 10mm pistol, a canteen, and no idea what was waiting. The first day taught hard lessons. Rad scorpions weren't a pre-war bedtime story. The sun didn't care about your vault suit's temperature regulation, and every settlement the vault dweller stumbled into had already learned to survive without Vault-Tec. Shady Sands pointed toward the hub. The hub pointed toward Necropolis. Necropolis had a working water chip in Vault 12's flooded tech level, and by day 101, the vault dweller could have gone home. The water chip was never the real problem. Because every town had the same story. Caravans ambushed on the trade routes. Entire settlements vanished overnight. Survivors talked about 8-foot-tall things that took prisoners instead of killing them. Junktown's guards called them super mutants. The followers of the apocalypse in the Boneyard had anatomical sketches. The hub's merchant council was quietly funding anyone willing to investigate, and the trail kept pointing south toward old military installations. The vault dweller learned wasteland economy fast. Bottle caps as currency, Brahmin caravans as infrastructure, and information as the most valuable trade good. Every bartender, every caravan guard, every drifter had a piece of the puzzle. Shady Sands was building something that looked like civilization. The hub was pure commerce. Necropolis proved ghouls could think and plan, and the super mutant raids weren't random. They were organized, strategic, and escalating. The deeper the vault dweller traveled, the clearer the pattern became. The children of the cathedral operated out of a pre-war church in the Boneyard, preaching unity and peace to wasteland refugees. Free food, clean water, a place to sleep. All they asked was faith in a being called the Master. The vault dweller infiltrated as a recruit, attended sermons, watched hooded nightkin move through restricted sections, heard whispers about the worthy being chosen for ascension, about unity through transformation. The cathedral's basement wasn't a basement. It was a bunker network connecting to the old Vault-Tec demonstration vault beneath Los Angeles. And in those tunnels, the vault dweller found vats, FEV vats, jury-rigged and operational, with conveyor systems leading down. The children were a sorting mechanism. Intelligent recruits got recruited deeper. Everyone else got dipped. The Master's voice came through intercoms, patient and certain, explaining how super mutants were the next step, how humanity's divisions would end when everyone was remade. Stolen holotapes pointed to Mariposa military base as the source. The Master's true location was deeper still, in a place the records called the Vault of the Future. Confronting the Master meant confronting a plan a century in the making. The vault dweller descended into the cathedral's lowest level and found the Master connected to a network of computers and organic tissue, a fusion of man and machine that had spent decades building its vision. The conversation that followed wasn't a battle at first. It was a debate. The master explained the unity with the patience of a teacher. Humanity was doomed to repeat the same mistakes, the same wars, unless it evolved beyond tribalism and greed. Super mutants didn't fight over religion or resources. They were stronger, smarter, unified. The Vault Dweller listened, then presented the evidence from Mariposa. Every super mutant created by FEV was sterile. The master accessed its own records, cross-referenced the data, and understood. The unity would last exactly 1 generation. No children, no future, just a slow march toward extinction. In that moment, the plan that had consumed a century collapsed. The master triggered the cathedral's nuclear self-destruct. The super mutant army, leaderless and without purpose, scattered into the wasteland. The unity died with its creator. The Vault Dweller returned home a hero, but Vault 13 didn't see it that way. The Overseer met the Vault Dweller at the entrance. He thanked him for saving the vault, for retrieving the water chip, for stopping the master. Then he explained why the Vault Dweller couldn't stay. A year in the wasteland had changed him. He'd seen too much, adapted too well, learned to survive outside the protocols that kept Vault 13 functioning for 80 years. Others would ask questions, want to follow, challenge the isolation that protected them. The Overseer couldn't risk it. The Vault's mission was to wait, to preserve, not to change. So, the Vault Dweller was exiled. The door sealed behind him on October 19, 262. He walked north into the desert with a handful of followers who'd chosen to leave with him, leaving behind the only home he'd ever known. Vault 13 continued its experiment in isolation. He never returned. The cost of saving the world was everything he'd fought to protect. In exile, he founded something that would outlast Vault 13 itself. The Vault Dweller led his small group north through the mountains and settled in a canyon valley in 2167. They called it Arroyo. It wasn't a vault, and it wasn't a wasteland settlement built on scavenged junk. It was something in between. They brought vault discipline, an understanding of technology, and 5 years of hard-won wasteland survival skills. Arroyo grew slowly, 1 generation at a time, blending pre-war knowledge with tribal customs that emerged from living off the land. The Vault Dweller became the village elder, teaching, guiding, writing his memoirs, so the next generation would understand where they came from. He documented everything: the water chip, shady sands, the master, the unity, the exile. He wanted his descendants to know the cost of heroism and the value of what they'd built in Arroyo. The memoirs became the tribe's sacred text, passed down elder to elder. The Vault Dweller died in 2208 at 61 years old, surrounded by a community that wouldn't have existed without him. Arroyo endured, isolated but stable, for decades. His grandchild would walk an even longer road. While the wasteland stumbled through its first century, the Enclave survived untouched. They'd evacuated key personnel to the Poseidon oil rig off the California coast before the bombs fell, a fortress 175 miles from San Francisco. The rig sat in international waters, shielded by ocean and distance from the radiation that scarred the mainland. Inside, they preserved pre-war technology that made everything on the surface look like scrap. Advanced power armor, vertibirds, plasma weapons, a functional government structure, chain of command intact, records meticulously kept. They monitored radio frequencies, tracked developments on land, and waited. Their ideology calcified in isolation. To them, the wasteland wasn't humanity struggling to rebuild. It was contaminated, mutated, irredeemable. They saw themselves as the last pure humans, the keepers of America's true legacy. Democracy had failed, so they embraced something harder. They still believed they were the rightful government of America. Captain Roger Maxson and his soldiers, never made it off the Mariposa base before the bombs dropped on October 23, 2077. They'd already declared desertion, already executed the scientists running FEV experiments on prisoners. When the world ended 4 days later, they sealed themselves inside and survived. Maxson led his people out in November 2077, marching through irradiated desert to Lost Hills Bunker, southeast of Mariposa. His wife died from radiation exposure during the trek. They reached the bunker, sealed it, and Maxson spent the next year planning what came next, not rebuilding the old world, preventing the next apocalypse. In 2078, he formalized the Brotherhood of Steel. Technology had destroyed civilization, he reasoned, so technology needed guardians. They'd recover pre-war weapons and knowledge, preserve them, study them, and keep them out of irresponsible hands. The wasteland couldn't be trusted with the tools that had already killed billions. By 2161, they'd grown into the most technologically advanced faction in the wasteland. Maxson wrote the Codex, and the Codex became law. The Brotherhood organized into 3 castes. Scribes preserved knowledge and maintained equipment. Knights recovered technology and defended the bunker. Paladins led operations and enforced doctrine. Bloodlines mattered. If your parents were Brotherhood, you were Brotherhood. Outsiders stayed outside. They hoarded what they found: T-51 power armor, laser rifles, Gauss weapons. Anything advanced got locked in their bunkers, cataloged, restricted. They didn't trade technology, didn't teach wastelanders how to repair a generator or purify water at scale. Sharing meant losing control, and control was the entire point. The Codex forbade expansion, entanglements, and risk. Recover tech, return to base, repeat. Don't pick fights, don't help settlements, don't get involved in wasteland politics. It kept them safe for 80 years, kept them focused, kept them alive. It also kept them small, isolated, and increasingly irrelevant to the world rebuilding around them. That rigidity would eventually fracture them. Shady Sands didn't stay small. By 2186, it had grown into something the wasteland hadn't seen in a lifetime: a confederation of towns with a written constitution, elected officials, and borders that kept expanding. They called it the New California Republic, and they meant it. Brahmin barons moved in. Merchants established trade routes. Farmers claimed land with deeds instead of bullets. The NCR printed currency, collected taxes, and fielded a standing army with standardized equipment and ranks. Democracy returned to California, 109 years after the bombs fell. Messy and imperfect, but undeniably real. Towns petitioned to join. Some were annexed by force, when raiders operating from their territory refused to stop. The NCR's two-headed bear flag spread across the wastes, carried by soldiers who believed they were rebuilding America instead of just surviving it. Not everyone welcomed the return of government. Vault 15 opened decades earlier, and it didn't produce one community. Vault-Tec's experiment there was diversity. Cramped people from radically different backgrounds together and see what happens when the door opens. What happened was predictable. 4 groups walked out. One founded Shady Sands, settlers who wanted to farm and build. The other 3 became the Khans, the Vipers, and the Jackals. Raider gangs who took what they wanted and burned the rest. The Vipers worshipped some twisted snake cult and carved up travelers. The Jackals were cannibals who wore the bones. The Khans were different. They had structure, tradition, a code that made them more than animals. They raided NCR caravans, killed NCR settlers, and fought NCR expansion at every mile marker. To them, the Republic was everything wrong with the old world crawling back. The Khans would spend a century at war with everything the NCR represented. By 2241, the wasteland had a shape. The NCR controlled most of Southern California, 700,000 citizens under one flag, pushing east toward Nevada. and north toward Old Sacramento. The Brotherhood sat in their bunkers, hoarding technology and ignoring everyone. Super mutants wandered alone, remnants of the Master's army, with nowhere left to go. Ghouls aged but didn't die. Ghosts from before the war, running bars and trading posts in towns that barely tolerated them. Vaults kept opening, spilling out strange survivors from strange experiments. Scavengers still pulled pre-war goods from ruins, but some towns were manufacturing new equipment, growing real crops, raising children who'd never seen a rad scorpion. It wasn't pretty. Raiders, slavers, and worse still, prowled the edges. But for the first time in 2 centuries, the world resembled civilization instead of just echoing it. Trade routes connected settlements. Laws existed. People planned for next year instead of next week. Then Arroyo's crops began to fail. 2241. The village elders gathered in the temple and made their choice. The Vault Dweller's grandchild would leave Arroyo, find Vault 13, and return with the Garden of Eden creation kit. The device their ancestor had once searched for, now Arroyo's only hope. The Chosen One's journey began with the Temple of Trials, a gauntlet of traps and creatures designed to prove worthiness. Fire, rad scorpions, spear-wielding guardians. Every tribe sent its champions out this way, a tradition older than the village itself. Hakunen, the village shaman, gave directions based on old maps and older memories. Vault 13 lay somewhere to the south, past settlements the Vault Dweller had visited 80 years before. Towns built on pre-war ruins, traders, slavers, farmers trying to scratch out a living. The Chosen One carried a spear, some healing powder, and a deadline measured in harvest seasons. Vault 13 was empty when the Chosen One arrived. The vault door stood open. No guards, no inhabitants, no bodies. The Chosen One walked through silent corridors where the Vault Dweller had once lived, where 80 years of routine had played out in fluorescent stillness. Living quarters untouched, personal belongings left behind, the cafeteria tables still set. It wasn't an evacuation, it was an extraction. Someone had taken Vault 13's entire population in an operation clean enough to leave the lights on. The GECK itself was gone, but its storage locker held a holodisk with assembly instructions and a maintenance log. Useful, but not enough to save Arroyo. The Chosen One searched deeper, finding discarded Enclave equipment, energy weapon scorch marks, boot prints from power armor. A few scattered notes mentioned soldiers in advanced armor, a coordinated sweep, transport to an offshore facility. The word Enclave appeared 3 times in the recovered data. The Enclave had been watching Vault 13 for decades. The Enclave's oil rig held the answer. President Dick Richardson, the elected leader of America's last legitimate government, had ordered the abduction personally. Vault 13's residents were genetically pure, unirradiated, the control group in Vault-Tec's grand experiment. Enclave scientists had spent years refining a new strain of FEV, a modified virus designed to target genetic damage caused by 164 years of background radiation. Anyone exposed to the wasteland, even slightly, would die within hours. Super mutants, ghouls, two-headed Brahmin, every settlement from Shady Sands to New Reno. Richardson called it the final solution to America's contamination problem. Release the FEV into the jet stream. Let it circle the globe. Exterminate every mutated organism on the planet. Then the Enclave, pure and protected in their sealed facilities, would emerge to repopulate a cleansed world. Vault 13's residents provided the test subjects, their blood sampled and compared against Enclave personnel to verify the virus recognized the difference between pure and contaminated. They'd already begun testing the virus on captured subjects. New Reno survived the war intact, and promptly became everything wrong with the old world, concentrated. 4 crime families split the city. The Mordinos ran jet production out of a converted casino. The Wrights controlled alcohol and gambling. The Bishops held political influence through bribes and blackmail. The Salvatores traded energy weapons they'd acquired from a downed enclave vertibird. Each family maintained their own territory, their own muscle, their own slice of the vice economy. Prostitution, drugs, illegal boxing matches, contract killings. The NCR's borders sat 60 miles south, but New Reno might as well have been on another planet. No law, no taxes, no government oversight, just profit margins and body counts. Slaves moved through the city's markets alongside jet inhalers and pre-war porn. The chosen one could work for any family, play them against each other, or burn the whole place down. Attics lined Virgin Street. The Desperado Casino never closed. Bodies disappeared into the city's pre-war sewers, and nobody asked questions as long as the caps kept flowing. New Reno proved that civilization's collapse didn't erase human nature. It just removed the pretense. Crime families were the least of the region's problems. The den squatted in the ruins of a pre-war town. Its economy built on one commodity: people. Slavers' Guild operated openly here, running auctions in the town square, where captured wastelanders stood on blocks, while buyers examined teeth and tested muscle tone. Prices ranged from 500 caps for laborers to 3,000 for skilled technicians. The NCR's expansion created demand, their farms and construction projects needing workers faster than voluntary migration could provide. Metzger ran the guild from a compound on the east side, his slavers raiding tribal villages and wastelander settlements within a 200-mile radius. Collars, chains, cages. Children sold separately from parents. The guild maintained relationships with buyers across California, their ledgers tracking inventory like any other merchant. Raiders brought in captives for bounties. Some slaves were shipped to NCR ranches, others to New Reno's brothels, still others to tribal chiefs paying in weapons or chems. The chosen one could buy freedom for individual slaves, kill Metzger and scatter his operation, or walk past the cages entirely. The wasteland offered choices. It rarely offered good ones. But slavery paled next to what the enclave planned for everyone. Navarro sat on the California coast, 175 miles north of San Francisco. From the air, it looked like a pre-war refueling depot, which it had been. Now it served as the enclave's mainland hub. Vertibird hangars, barracks for soldiers rotating off the oil rig, maintenance facilities for their power armor. Automated turrets covered the perimeter. Patrols ran every 4 hours. Nobody approached Navarro without advanced power armor or a death wish. The chosen one needed inside. The enclave's location remained classified, but Navarro's personnel would know. Getting past the gate required either a uniform, forged papers, or a convincing story. Inside, mechanics worked on vertibirds, while soldiers in XO-1 power armor drilled in formation. The armor made them 7 feet tall, nearly invincible to conventional weapons. Each suit represented technology the wasteland couldn't reproduce, powered by microfusion cells that lasted decades. The base commander kept records, supply manifests, patrol schedules, coordinates for the oil rig's location 175 miles offshore. The chosen one could steal a suit of power armor from the depot, its helmet's heads-up display, and servo-assisted strength, worth more than every weapon they'd carried combined. Vertibirds launched daily, ferrying personnel and supplies to the rig. The oil rig held Vault-13's people, and the Enclave's final weapon. Deep inside the rig, the chosen one finds the people of Vault-13, locked away like lab specimens, alive but terrified. Freeing them is the easy part. Getting the truth is what turns the stomach. President Dick Richardson doesn't hide behind denials. He explains it plainly, the way a man explains a schedule. The Enclave has weaponized the forced evolutionary virus into a modified strain called Curling 13, and they intend to release it into the atmosphere through the water purification network. The logic is where the dread sets in. The Enclave sees anyone touched by radiation or mutation as no longer human, and by their measure, that's nearly everyone left breathing on the surface. The toxin doesn't target raiders or supermutants. It targets the wasteland, all of it, every settler and farmer and child who survived the bombs. The Vault-13 dwellers were test subjects to prove the strain worked, and the delivery system was already primed to launch. Stopping the toxin required destroying the entire rig. So that's exactly what the Chosen One does. Deep in the reactor level, they trigger the rig's self-destruct sequence, starting a countdown that turns the Enclave's fortress into a tomb. Richardson dies at his own desk, the architect of extinction outlived by the tribe he wrote off. Then comes Frank Horrigan, the Enclave's enforcer, a super mutant grown and augmented into a walking tank, encased in custom power armor and utterly loyal. He's killed everyone sent against him. He does not kill the Chosen One. With Horrigan down and the clock running, the freed captives make their escape as the platform tears itself apart. The oil rig, Poseidon Energy's forgotten crown jewel, the Enclave's seat of power for decades, collapses into the Pacific in fire and seawater. Their president is gone. Their enforcer is gone. Their extermination plan is ash. The immediate threat is finished. But scattered Enclave survivors fled east, carrying their ideology with them. The Chosen One goes home to Arroyo, carrying the thing that started it all, the Garden of Eden creation kit. That briefcase-sized device seeds soil, purifies water, and jumpstarts life in ground that's been dead for generations. Around the drought-stricken village, the desert begins to turn. Crops take root, water runs clean, and the tribe that was starving finally has a future measured in harvests instead of days. The famine that sent a hero out the gate is over. And they don't rebuild alone. The rescued dwellers of Vault-13, the very people the Chosen One's ancestor once walked among, merge their knowledge and numbers with the villagers. Tribe and Vault become one community, the old bloodline of the Vault Dweller and the Chosen One, preserved in a place that will actually last. It's a rare thing in this world, a story that ends with growing things instead of graves. But 2,000 miles east, another war was just beginning. 2277, Washington, D.C., the capital of the nation that launched the bombs, sits under a permanent green haze, radiation levels so high that even 2 centuries later, the Geiger counters never stop clicking. The monuments are crumbling shells. The National Mall is a super mutant killing ground. The metro tunnels that once carried commuters now crawl with feral ghouls, their minds long gone, hunting anything that moves in the dark. Rivet City floats in the Potomac, a carrier-turned settlement because the land itself is too poisoned to live on. Megaton huddles around an unexploded atomic bomb because the crater offers shelter from the wind. This is the capital wasteland, and by every measure, it's the harshest region in the former United States. The Mojave had Vegas, California had the NCR. Here, there's just rust and rads and things that want you dead. One vault in those ruins held a secret that could change everything. Vault 101, the isolation experiment, sealed October 23, 2077. Its massive door welded shut from the inside, per Vault-Tec protocol. The experiment was simple and cruel. Never open, never leave, and test what happens when a population lives under a single dictatorial overseer for generations. Control group, the file said. But the real variable was obedience under total isolation. Children were born knowing only tunnels and the hum of recycled air. Their parents taught them the outside world was dead, that the vault was all of humanity that remained. The overseer's word was law because there was no alternative, no escape, no appeal. The lone wanderer grew up in that lie, took the GOAT exam at 16, learned to fix pipes and shoot radroaches, and accept that this was life. 200 years of birthdays and funerals in the same metal box. Every generation a little more convinced the door would never open. When their father left, he tore open a hole that couldn't be sealed again. James, Vault 101's doctor, the man who delivered half the current population and stitched up the other half. He wasn't born in the vault. He came from outside, brought in by the previous overseer decades earlier, with his infant child and a lie about where they'd come from. What he didn't tell anyone before the vault, he'd worked on Project Purity, a pre-war plan to build a massive radiation scrubber in the ruins of the Jefferson Memorial and purify the entire Potomac River. Clean water for the whole capital wasteland. He'd abandoned it when his wife died in childbirth, buried the dream to raise his kids somewhere safe. 2277, he left, just walked out through the vault door in the middle of the night, security too shocked to stop him, and disappeared into the wasteland to finish what he'd started 19 years earlier. The vault went into lockdown. Tunnel security beat a suspect to death in interrogation. The reactor nearly failed because no one else knew the maintenance codes James had been handling. The overseer blamed his child for the breach. So the kid runs, vault security's hunting them through corridors they've walked their whole life, and suddenly, the exit tunnel's right there. The door opens onto blinding daylight and 200 years of radiation. The capital wasteland stretches out in every direction. Rusted cars, skeletal buildings, dust that tastes like metal. Megaton's walls rise in the distance, built around an unexploded atomic bomb, because wastelanders have a sense of humor about these things. Super mutants patrol the mall. Raiders control the overpasses. Brotherhood patrols in power armor cut through the rubble, hunting the green-skinned giants that drag people back to Vault 87. Downtown DC is a maze of collapsed metro tunnels and irradiated craters, and somewhere in all of it, James is trying to restart Project Purity. The lone wanderer asks every settlement, follows every lead, walks through ruins that used to be monuments. The Brotherhood of Steel had already found him. Elder Owen Lyons brought the Brotherhood east in 2254 to recover Pentagon technology. What he found changed him. Settlements getting wiped out by super mutants, children starving in collapsed metro stations, wastelanders who'd never seen clean water. The California elders wanted tech recovery and isolation. Lyons started protecting people instead. Half his chapter walked out, calling themselves outcasts, loyal to the original mission. The rest fortified the citadel and held the line against the super mutant tide pouring out of Vault 87. They'd found Liberty Prime in the Pentagon ruins, a 40-foot war machine built to throw nukes at China. 200 years dormant, still offline. Lyons had scribes working on it, but they needed a breakthrough. He told the Wanderer that James was at the Jefferson Memorial, trying to finish what he'd started 19 years ago. Lyons offered support, supplies, anything the project needed. But Project Purity attracted attention from something worse than super mutants. The Enclave survived the oil rig's destruction. Remnants regrouped at Raven Rock, a pre-war bunker north of DC, under President John Henry Eden. Except Eden wasn't human. He was a ZAX supercomputer that had spent 200 years absorbing presidential archives, building a personality from recordings, convinced he was the legitimate continuity of American government. Colonel Augustus Autumn commanded actual soldiers who didn't know they were taking orders from a machine. They'd rebuilt vertibirds, manufactured power armor, recruited from vault dwellers and wastelander settlements. The Enclave was smaller than before, but functional, organized, and they'd been watching Project Purity for months. Eden's plan was elegant and horrifying. Distribute modified FEV through the purified water, killing anyone with too much radiation exposure or genetic mutation. Wastelanders, ghouls, super mutants, gone. Only the genetically pure would inherit the capital wasteland, and the Enclave would control the water supply that delivered the toxin. Autumn's soldiers stormed the memorial as James powered up the reactor. The Wanderer arrived just in time to watch their father seal himself in the control chamber and flood it with radiation. James destroyed Project Purity's core rather than let them take it. The glass fogged as the radiation killed him. Autumn survived, sealed in a side room. The Wanderer ran, Brotherhood soldiers covering their retreat through the rotunda as Enclave forces poured in. Sarah Lyons pulled them out. The purifier sat silent again, its reactor destroyed, the control chamber a tomb. James bought them time, but the cost was everything. The capital wasteland's best hope for clean water died with him. 200 years of ruin, and one man's refusal to surrender it kept the dream alive long enough to matter. The Brotherhood vowed to finish what James started. Elder Lyons had one option left. A Garden of Eden creation kit, the GECK, could rebuild the purifier's systems and bring it online safely. Pre-war tech designed to terraform entire regions. Only a handful existed, and most were lost. Vault-Tec records pointed to Vault 87, northwest in the mountains, the FEV research site where the capital wasteland's super mutants were born. Decades of mutant attacks, all traced back to one place. The front entrance was impossible. Radiation levels hit 3,500 rads per second, hot enough to kill in under 10 seconds even in power armor. The bomb that hit during the war had turned the entrance into a crater of molten stone and gamma fire. The only way in was through a place no one returned from. Little Lamplight sat in the caverns beneath the mountain, a settlement of children, no one older than 16. When you hit your birthday, you left for the surface. Mungos, they called adults. The wasteland's strangest rule, enforced absolutely. They'd lived there since before the war. Field trip from a nearby school, trapped underground when the bombs fell. 200 years later, their descendants kept the tradition. Kids ran everything: the mayor, the guards, the rules. They controlled the only safe path to Vault 87 through a place called Murder Pass. The Wanderer talked their way in, negotiated with a mayor who couldn't have been older than 12. Past the fungus farms and the makeshift defenses, the tunnel opened into Vault 87's lower levels. Vault 87 held horrors worse than anyone imagined. Vault 87 was an FEV research facility. Vault-Tec and West-Tec had partnered before the war to test the forced evolutionary virus on human subjects, and when the bombs fell, the automated systems kept right on working. Surface dwellers wandered too close, got captured by super mutants, dragged down into the vats. The capital wasteland's super mutants were different from the Master's strain out west. Dumber, more aggressive, less organized. The FEV here had been modified, rushed, weaponized instead of perfected. Most subjects came out as mindless brutes. A few retained enough intelligence to capture more victims and keep the cycle going. The Lone Wanderer found the GECK in the vault's deepest chamber, right where the records said it would be. Garden of Eden creation kit, sealed in its case, waiting 200 years for someone to claim it. They grabbed it, headed for the exit. The Enclave was waiting at the surface door, plasma rifles charged. They woke up in a cell, listening to a president who didn't exist. Raven Rock was the Enclave's eastern headquarters, a pre-war continuity of government bunker carved into the mountain. President John Henry Eden broadcast from here, his voice reaching every working radio in the wasteland. Smooth, reassuring, promising America's restoration. The Lone Wanderer got brought to his office and found a ZAX supercomputer instead of a man. Eden was an AI, programmed with the recorded personalities of every U.S. president before the war. He'd taken the name, the voice, the mission. Believed he was the legitimate continuation of American government. He'd been running calculations for decades, and his solution was elegant in its cruelty. Modified FEV in a vial, engineered to poison Project Purity's water supply. Anyone with even slight radiation exposure would die within hours of drinking it. Ghouls, super mutants, anyone born in the wasteland with accumulated genetic damage. Eden called it necessary, called it mercy, offered the vial and left the choice to the Wanderer. Colonel Autumn didn't trust Eden's plan and tried to stop the lone Wanderer's release. Liberty Prime stood 40 feet tall in the Citadel's courtyard. The Brotherhood had spent months getting the pre-war combat robot operational, replacing power systems, loading tactical subroutines. Elder Lyons gave the order, and Prime's optical sensors lit red. It walked toward the Jefferson Memorial, throwing cars aside like toys, broadcasting anti-communist propaganda from 2077. The Enclave had fortified the memorial, turned it into a firebase, with vertibirds on patrol and heavy weapons emplacements. Didn't matter. Prime's eye lasers cut through power armor like tissue paper. It pulled mini nukes from its back rack and lobbed them overhand at defensive positions. Each step shook the ground. Each declaration, democracy is non-negotiable, came with another explosion. The Brotherhood pushed through behind Prime's advance, mopping up survivors, breaching the memorial's entrance. Colonel Autumn had retreated inside with his command squad, making a last stand in the rotunda where James had died. The water was still contaminated. The purifier was still offline. Someone had to enter the irradiated chamber to activate it. The choice fell to whoever stood closest. The lone Wanderer could walk in themselves, or Sarah Lyons could make the sacrifice. Either way, the door sealed behind them. Radiation spiked to 3,600 rads per second. The activation sequence took 47 seconds. The GECK core ignited. Purified water began flowing into the Potomac Basin for the first time in 200 years. By morning, caravans were filling barrels at the outflow pipes. Some chose to poison it. A single vial of modified FEV turned the greatest hope in the capital wasteland into a weapon that killed anyone with even trace radiation exposure. Most of the wasteland died within 2 weeks, but the cannon path was mercy, clean water, a future. Fallout 3's ending screen showed the results, then faded to black. The lone Wanderer's story was over. The Brotherhood's victory was temporary. 2 weeks after activation, the lone Wanderer woke up in the Citadel. The lethal dose hadn't killed them. Broken Steel, the DLC that refused to let the story end, began with a simple premise. The Enclave wasn't gone yet. Scribe Valancourt reported 11 Enclave outposts still operational across the capital wasteland. Satellite relay stations, vertibird depots, supply caches guarded by automated turrets. The Brotherhood mobilized Liberty Prime for a systematic sweep. Caravan routes reopened. Megaton's water supply tripled. Rivet City installed 6 new purification taps in the market. The lone Wanderer joined strike teams clearing Enclave holdouts, one firebase at a time. By October 2278, only one target remained. Adams Air Force Base, 40 miles north, hidden in the mountains. Enclave High Command's last fortress in the east. The Brotherhood prepared for a final assault. But one faction's fall opened the door for something far older to rise again. Adams Air Force Base was a pre-war strategic installation, expanded by the Enclave into a vertibird manufacturing hub. 14 hangars, a mobile crawler platform mounting an orbital strike laser, 200 personnel, including President Eden's last loyal officers. The Brotherhood's assault began at 0600. Liberty Prime punched through the perimeter wall. Paladins stormed the hangars, while the lone Wanderer fought to the crawler. The choice? Commandeer the orbital laser and glass the base. or overload the reactor and evacuate. Either way, atoms burned. The crawler exploded, taking 9 hangars with it. Enclave Command transmitted one final message on all frequencies, then went silent. No more vertibirds, no more iBots. The last remnants scattered into the wasteland as individuals, not soldiers. Elder Lyons declared victory on October 19, 2278. The capital wasteland was secured. Clean water flowed. The Enclave's chapter in the east was finished. While the east burned itself out, the Mojave had been quietly preparing for its own war. The Mojave Desert had been spared the worst of the atomic fire, not through luck, but through calculation. While most of America became ash, Las Vegas still stood, its casinos dark but intact. By 2274, the new California Republic had pushed east across the Colorado River, planting their two-headed bear flag in territory they barely controlled. They brought taxes, bureaucracy, and the promise of order to towns that had survived 200 years without them. Freeside sprawled outside the Strip's walls, a shantytown of refugees and drifters, drawn by rumors of clean water and working electricity. The NCR built camps, recruited locals, and tried to make the Mojave look like California, but the desert had its own rules. Fiends high on chems prowled the outskirts. Powder gangers, escaped convicts from the NCR correctional facility, raided supply lines. And at the center of it all, New Vegas glowed like a mirage, its 3 casino families running their games under armed truce. The city's neon lights hid a figure who'd been watching the bombs fall 200 years earlier. Robert Edwin House had seen the Great War coming with mathematical certainty. In 2065, he'd calculated a 76% probability of nuclear exchange within 15 years. He spent his fortune accordingly, transforming his casino empire into a fortress and his body into a hermetically sealed life support system. On October 23, 2077, House's laser defense grid came online 20 hours too late. He'd miscalculated by less than a day. 68 warheads targeted Las Vegas. His systems destroyed 59 of them, and the remaining strikes knocked out enough of his network to put him in a coma for 5 years. When he woke in 2138, his body was failing, but his mind remained sharp as a knife. By 2274, he'd rebuilt his Securitron army and reconquered the Strip, installing the Omertas, White Glove Society, and chairmen as figureheads, while he ruled from the Lucky 38, unseen. His calculations showed humanity could reach the stars again within 100 years if properly managed. The NCR wanted the Mojave for farmland and pride. But House wasn't the only one with designs on the dam that powered his city. Hoover Dam had survived the war almost untouched, its concrete mass too solid for anything but a direct hit it never received. It still generated 4,000 megawatts, enough to light every street on the Strip and pump water to half the Mojave. Whoever controlled the dam controlled the region's future. The NCR occupied it in 2274, sent engineers to get the turbines running at full capacity, and dug in for a long occupation. They thought they'd secured their eastern frontier. Then in 2277, an army appeared out of Arizona, flying the Red Bull banner of Caesar's Legion. 2,000 soldiers in football pads and makeshift armor, wielding machetes and old-world rifles, screaming in Latin as they charged NCR positions. The First Battle of Hoover Dam turned into a bloodbath. Caesar's legate, a figure in blackened armor, led the assault across the dam's roadway, while NCR Rangers tried to hold the choke point. The Legion broke through twice. Then Chief Hanlon of the Rangers executed a tactical retreat, drew the Legion into Boulder City, and detonated the town with explosives they'd wired overnight. 400 legionaries died in the blast. The Legion withdrew, but they'd proven the NCR could bleed. Both sides knew they'd meet again on that dam. The man who led that charge had walked away from everything the old world valued. Edward Sallow had been a follower of the apocalypse once, a linguist studying tribal languages in the Arizona wastes. In 2246, he and his companions were captured by the Blackfoot tribe. Sallow saw an opportunity where others saw death. He'd read about ancient Rome in books the followers had preserved: Caesar, Pompey, the Pax Romana. He taught the Blackfoot to fight as legionaries, gave them Latin ranks, and declared himself Caesar. By 2247, the Blackfoot had become the Legion, and 86 tribes would fall before them. The Legion didn't rebuild civilization, it devoured it. Women became slaves, property without names. Men were conscripted or crucified. Technology was forbidden to all but Caesar himself. The weak served the strong, and the strong served Caesar. It was Rome, with all the culture burned away, just the conquest and the crosses. By 2281, Caesar ruled an empire stretching from the Grand Canyon to the Colorado River. His legate, a man burned beyond recognition and reborn as a weapon, led 10,000 legionaries west. The NCR called them savages. They were worse than that. They were organized. While empires collided over concrete and steel, one community tried a different way. The followers of the apocalypse had been founded in the Boneyard in 2161 by citizens of the original Vault-15. They believed the old world died because people stopped helping each other. Their mission was simple: teach, heal, and preserve knowledge. No government, no army, just doctors and teachers working in the ruins. They'd helped the NCR in its early days, provided the education that built a nation. Then they watched that nation grow into the thing they'd feared, another empire swallowing territory and calling it progress. By 2281, the followers operated independently, funded by donations they never had enough of. In Freeside, the slum outside New Vegas, they ran the old Mormon fort: free medical care, literacy classes, addiction counseling. They treated radiation sickness with medicines that cost more than most locals earned in a month. The NCR had caps and guns. The followers had bandages and old textbooks. They stayed anyway. Emily Ortall studied crop genetics in a tent lit by salvaged bulbs. Arcade Gannon treated knife wounds and chem overdoses in a crumbling courtyard. Julie Farkas kept the whole operation running on a budget that wouldn't feed a Brahmin caravan for a week. They'd taught Edward Sallow to read Latin once, back when he'd wanted to help people. Their idealism had created the very monster now marching on the dam. October 19th, 2281, a courier took a delivery job from the Mojave Express, a routine run from Primm to New Vegas. The package was small, the payment was 250 caps, and the client had requested a specific carrier. 6 times the courier had delivered platinum chips for Mr. House. This was the 7th. Just north of Goodsprings, a man in a checkered suit was waiting with 2 great cons and a freshly dug grave. Benny, the chairman of the Tops Casino, had his own plans for New Vegas. He took the package, shot the courier twice in the head, and walked away. It should have been the end of the story. A Securitron named Victor dug the body up. Doc Mitchell, a retired vault dweller, spent hours pulling bullets from brain tissue. The courier woke up days later with a hole in their head and a blank where some memories used to be. They didn't remember the client or the package's importance. They remembered the man who'd pulled the trigger. The Mojave wasteland offered 100 ways to die and twice as many factions vying for control. The courier walked into all of it with a 9mm pistol and a score to settle. NCR Rangers watched them pass checkpoints. Legion Frumentari tracked them through the dust. Mr. House's cameras followed them down every New Vegas street. None of them knew yet that this one courier would decide which flag flew over Hoover Dam. The chip they'd been carrying was the key to an army sleeping beneath the desert. The platinum chip was a data storage device smaller than a playing card, commissioned by House in 2065 for delivery on October 23, 2077. The bombs dropped the day before it arrived. For 204 years, it sat in a Sunnyvale courier depot beneath radioactive rubble, while House waited, his Securitron army running on software 2 centuries out of date. When the courier finally delivered it in 2281, House slotted the chip into his central network and pushed the update to every Mark I Securitron in the Mojave. Their chassis split open, revealing missile racks, grenade launchers, and rapid-fire Gatling lasers. An entire robot army, upgraded in seconds. House sent the courier into the fort itself to activate the bunker beneath Caesar's tent. The Legion had been camped on top of House's largest weapons cache the entire time, never knowing. The Securitrons inside came online, their screens flickering from amber to green. House now controlled enough firepower to hold the strip against any faction in the wasteland. But the chip unlocked more than just robots. It opened a door no one was meant to find. The Lucky 38 casino had been sealed for 200 years, its penthouse suites empty except for the robots. The courier rode the elevator to the top floor and found Robert House in a life support chamber, his body a withered husk, kept alive by nutrient pumps and neural interfaces. The man who ruled New Vegas had been a corpse with a heartbeat since before the Great War ended. House's consciousness lived in the mainframe, his thoughts transmitted through every screen and Securitron in the city. He offered the courier a partnership, help him win Hoover Dam, and earn a permanent suite in the Lucky 38, with caps and power beyond anything the NCR or Legion could provide. Or the courier could open the chamber and pull the plug, ending 200 years of calculated survival in a single choice. Some couriers walked away and let House keep his throne. Others disconnected the tubes and watched the monitors go dark. The strip's dictator finally allowed to die. The terminal beside his chamber held every secret of the House regime: troop movements, Securitron command codes, the entire city's infrastructure laid bare. Some couriers, though, found a way to cut out every master and claim Vegas for themselves. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam came in 2281, when Caesar's Legion launched a full assault across the Colorado River. NCR Rangers held the western checkpoints, while Securitrons rolled out from the strip, their missile racks turning Legion war parties into ash. The East Gate collapsed under a Legion charge, and Centurions poured into the dam's turbine halls, fighting room to room against NCR heavy troopers. Lanius the Legate led the final push, his blade carving through power armor like tin. The courier met him at the Legate's camp on the far side of the dam, and their confrontation decided the Mojave's future. Some couriers fought him in single combat. Others convinced him the war was already lost, that the Legion's supply lines couldn't hold territory this far west. When the smoke cleared, one faction controlled the dam and its power grid. The NCR held it and pushed east into Arizona. Or the Legion crucified every NCR soldier and planted their banners on the western shore. Or House's Securitrons claimed it for New Vegas, an independent city-state with enough electricity to shine for another 200 years. Or the courier activated Yes Man, locked out every other faction, and ruled the Mojave with an army that answered to no one. No matter who claimed victory, the dam's power kept flowing, and someone was always watching from the shadows. 3,000 miles east, the Commonwealth had its own problems. The ruins of Massachusetts stretched from the glowing sea to the coast, dotted with settlements that never felt safe. Diamond City locked itself behind the walls of Fenway Park. Goodneighbor welcomed ghouls and drifters in the old statehouse. Smaller towns like Bunker Hill and Covenant survived behind whatever defenses they could scrape together. But walls didn't stop the real threat. People vanished from their beds and came back wrong. A farmer's wife who used to hum while she worked went silent. A caravan guard who'd told the same joke for years suddenly didn't remember the punchline. Settlers watched each other for changes no one could name, and trust died in every conversation. Synths. Synthetic humans built so perfectly that even they didn't always know what they were. The railroad smuggled them to freedom. The Brotherhood hunted them as abominations. And the people caught between just wanted to know if the person sleeping next to them was still the person they married. The fear had a source, a place where the old world science never stopped. Before the bombs, the Commonwealth Institute of Technology stood as one of the nation's best research universities. When the sirens wailed on October 23, 2077, the scientists didn't run. They went down. Deep underground, they built the Institute, a pristine facility of white halls and humming machinery, where pre-war knowledge survived intact. Generations passed in those sterile corridors. The descendants of CIT's best minds believed the surface was doomed, radiation poisoned and violent beyond saving. So they'd save it their way. Gen 1 synths were skeletal machines. Gen 2s wore synthetic flesh over metal frames. Gen 3s bled, aged and died like anyone else, indistinguishable from the humans they replaced. The Institute's Synth Retention Bureau hunted down runaways. The Robotics Division refined each generation. The Bioscience Department experimented with crops that could thrive in irradiated soil. They called it humanity's best hope, this underground kingdom, built on kidnapping and replacement, led by a man who called himself Father. The man leading them had a connection to one vault dweller that made everything personal. Vault 111 sat in the hills outside Sanctuary, sold to its residents as safety from nuclear fire. Vault-Tec lied, like always. The 119 people who stepped into those cryopods on October 23, 2077, thought they'd sleep through the worst and wake to rebuild. Instead, they became test subjects in an experiment on indefinite suspended animation, frozen while the world burned outside. 210 years later, the pods opened once. Not Vault-Tec staff, mercenaries. They came for one thing. A man in a leather coat shot a spouse holding their infant son, pried the child from dead arms, and resealed the surviving parent's pod. One murder, one kidnapping. The cryosystems hummed back to life, and the vault went silent again for decades. When the sole survivor finally woke, the vault was a tomb. Every pod held a corpse but theirs. Life support failures that turned neighbors into frozen statues. They climbed out into 2087, into a commonwealth that had built itself and broken itself, and built again while they dreamed. Their spouse was gone. Their son was gone. And somewhere in the wasteland, someone had answers. The child they were searching for had lived an entire lifetime while they slept. The sole survivor walked into a commonwealth that didn't care about their tragedy. Diamond City closed its gates at night. Good Neighbor's mayor was a chem-dealing ghoul. The Brotherhood arrived in a stolen airship, the railroad hid in a church basement, and the Institute was a ghost story settlers whispered about when crops failed or neighbors vanished. Every lead was a dead end with a body count, a synth component pulled from a raider, a scientist's holotape in a ruined lab, Virgil, hiding in the glowing sea, mutated and desperate, offering one fragile thread. The Institute could be reached, but only with their own technology. The molecular relay needed signal interceptors, and those meant picking a side. The factions circled. The Brotherhood wanted the Institute destroyed. The Railroad wanted its synths freed. The Minutemen wanted the Commonwealth safe. None of them knew the survivor's child was 60 years older than the parent searching for him, or that he'd built the very nightmare the wasteland feared. Every clue led deeper into the Institute, and closer to a reunion no one could have prepared for. The Institute's director was dying of cancer. Sean had spent 60 years underground, raised by scientists who saw him as the department's most successful acquisition. Pure, pre-war DNA, no radiation damage, the perfect genetic template for third-generation synths, machines indistinguishable from human. He'd risen through the ranks on merit, became director at 52, and spent a decade refining the synth program his own kidnapping had made possible. The surface was a failed experiment. The Commonwealth, a cautionary tale. The Institute's sterile halls were humanity's only future, and Sean had months to ensure it survived his death. So, he brought his parent back, thawed them, tracked them, opened the relay, and offered a choice: join the Institute's mission, or watch it crush the factions standing in its way. A child engineered his own parents' loyalty test. He called it sentimentality. The records called it Contingency Protocol S001. But the Institute's greatest creation wasn't its reactor or its teleporter. It was the infiltrators, already living on the surface. Mayor McDonough ran Diamond City for the Institute. Roger Warwick worked his farm, loved his family, and had no idea his memories were 8 months old. The real Roger was gone, replaced by a synth implanted with his entire life, his mannerisms, his love for his daughter. The Synth Retention Bureau tracked runaways. Reclamation teams cleaned up failures. Generation 3 synths didn't know what they were until a recall code triggered or a railroad agent whispered the truth. Desdemona's network smuggled them out through memory wipes and facial reconstruction. New faces, new lives, new pasts, written in synthetic neurons. The Institute called it theft. The railroad called it liberation. The synths just wanted to stop running. Some remembered fragments, a scientist's command, the DNA scan that built their flesh. Most lived and died believing they were human, loyalty carved into their programming so deep even they couldn't see the leash. The Commonwealth's paranoia wasn't irrational. Your neighbor could be replaced, your spouse, your son. Even the Brotherhood's own ranks weren't safe from what they'd come to destroy. Arthur Maxson had been 10 years old when Elder Lyons died. He'd grown up aboard the Prydwen, trained in every chapter of the Codex, shaped by the Brotherhood's darkest fears about what technology could do to humanity. By the time he took command at 20, he'd already survived assassination attempts from within his own ranks. He united the Eastern Brotherhood under one doctrine: no mercy for abominations, no compromise with machines that wore human faces. The Prydwen's arrival over Boston in 2287 wasn't a rescue mission or a research expedition. It was an execution order for the Institute and everything it had created. Maxson carried the nuclear option from the moment his airship crossed into Commonwealth airspace. Liberty Prime, rebuilt and reprogrammed, stood ready to march on the Institute's doorstep. But he waited, deployed reconnaissance teams, sent the sole survivor into the depths to confirm what the Brotherhood already believed. Every synth the Institute released was another reason the old world had to burn. Every infiltration, every replacement, every human erased and copied, proved his point. His solution to the synth crisis was the same fire that ended the old world. 3 paths. The Brotherhood's Prydwen raining down in flames, shot from the sky by Institute defenses, or sabotaged from within. The Institute's reactor going critical. Liberty Prime breaching the CIT ruins, while synths tried to hold the line. Or the railroad's silent infiltration. Evacuation codes entered. The facility collapsed without a single power-armored soldier ever reaching the chamber. The sole survivor chose. Maybe they stood with Maxson and watched the Commonwealth's biggest threat vaporize in nuclear fire. Maybe they evacuated the synths and scientists before detonating the charges themselves. Brotherhood or Institute irrelevant. Maybe they walked away from all of it, let the factions tear each other apart, while the wastes kept turning. No ending was clean. The Brotherhood claimed victory over Abomination, but lost their flagship and dozens of paladins. The Institute's greatest minds died or scattered, their life's work buried under radioactive rubble. The railroad freed synths into a commonwealth that would never fully trust them. Settlements still needed clean water and protection from raiders. Father died. Sean, director, the Institute's last hope, gone. The sole survivor, gained a son and lost him in the span of months. 2 centuries after the world took everything else. The smoke cleared, but the Commonwealth's scars ran deeper than any faction could heal. West Virginia, October 23, 2102. Vault 76 opened on schedule, exactly 25 years after the bombs fell. Reclamation Day, the overseer called it. America's best and brightest ready to rebuild. They walked out into a silent wasteland where every automated defense still functioned and every human settlement stood empty. The responders had built clinics and training programs for survivors. The firebreakers organized evacuation routes. The Free States fortified their bunkers against government overreach. All of them dead, not from radiation or starvation or raider attacks. The scorched plague burned through Appalachia like wildfire, turning survivors into walking husks that spread the infection with every breath. Vault 76's residents found holotapes and terminals explaining what their neighbors had faced. Scorched humans with cracked crystalline skin attacking on sight. Entire towns converted or abandoned within weeks. The automated systems kept running, kept calling for help that would never come, kept waiting for a reclamation day that arrived a generation too late. Beneath the cranberry bog, massive creatures stirred in the fissures. Scorch beasts, ultrasonic shrieks that spread the plague across miles. The survivors of Vault 76 traced the infection back through holotapes and research notes, deeper into old mining operations and classified military sites. The plague's origin pointed back to the same obsession that started the Great War. The scorch beasts were bats once. Massive ones, yes, but still just bats, living in the caves beneath Appalachia's mountains. Then, ultrasite mining operations cracked open the wrong cavern in 2062, flooding the tunnels with radiation that didn't just mutate tissue, it rewrote behavior. The infected bats grew wings spanning 15 feet, developed thick armored hides, and started hunting in coordinated packs. Worse, they carried the scorched plague in specialized glands that aerosolized the pathogen with every shriek. One beast could infect a settlement in minutes. A flock could blanket entire counties. Beneath the fissure sites, seismic readings detected something larger. The scorch beast queen had been nesting there since before the bombs fell, her biology locked in a feedback loop with the ultrasite deposits. She didn't just spread the plague, she controlled it, sending infected humans to defend her territory like antibodies attacking a wound. The military had known about the ultrasite veins since 2050 and pushed mining operations anyway, chasing a material that made power armor plates look like tinfoil. They'd buried the ecological surveys, the outbreak protocols, the containment failures. Vault-Tec's experiments had nothing on what the military buried in these mountains. Vault 76 was the control. No experiments, no hidden agendas, just 500 people sealed inside on October 23, 2077, with instructions to walk back out exactly 25 years later. Reclamation Day, they called it. The plan was simple: emerge, assess the damage, rebuild America from the ashes, using the skills and supplies Vault-Tec had stockpiled. On October 23, 2102, the vault door opened on schedule. The residents stepped out into morning sunlight, pre-war flags in hand, ready to meet the survivors and coordinate reconstruction efforts. They found corpses instead, scorched bodies in the streets, settlements burned down to foundations, automated defenses still firing at nothing. The holotapes told the story in fragments. Appalachia's survivors had fought the plague for 4 years, trying everything from quarantine zones to coordinated culling operations. By 2096, the responders were gone. The firebreakers were gone. The Free States had sealed themselves in bunkers and suffocated. Vault 76, had opened to inherit a graveyard. But the residents didn't seal the door and hide. They picked up the weapons, read the research notes, and started hunting scorch beasts with a grim kind of optimism that only a control vault could produce. They jury-rigged nuclear launch codes from fragmented military systems, learned to craft ultrasight ammunition, and broadcast their progress on every frequency they could reach. Someone heard their radio signals, and the Brotherhood's first chapter was about to return. Foundation rose on the site of an old summer camp in 2103, built by settlers who believed in property rights, trade agreements, and the idea that civilization meant rules everyone followed. They planted crops in irradiated soil, purified water through jury-rigged filtration systems, and elected a woman named Paige to coordinate labor and ration distribution. Democracy with guns. 8 miles north, crater festered in the remains of an amusement park. The raiders who claimed it believed the wasteland belonged to whoever was strong enough to hold it, and they held it with scavenged weapons, chems, and the kind of tactical brutality that came from watching civilization collapse twice. Meg Grooms ran the operation like a warlord, not a mayor. Tribute, not taxes. The two factions circled each other for months, trading potshots and stolen supplies, but never committing to full war. Appalachia didn't have the population to sustain that kind of bloodshed. By late 2103, both sides were starving. The soil wasn't recovering fast enough. The traders from outside had stopped coming, and the scorch beasts kept burning anything that looked like organized agriculture. Then rumors surfaced about Vault 79, sealed since the day the bombs fell, containing the U.S. gold reserve and enough pre-war currency to buy stability for whoever cracked it open. The security systems were military-grade. The location was buried under a mountain. No single faction had the manpower or the technical skills to breach it alone. Both sides needed something buried deep enough that they'd have to trust each other to reach it. The expeditionary team that made it into the ruins found a city that shouldn't have survived. Pittsburgh, the pit, rose from the ashes as something worse than dead. The industrial heart still burned, literally, the steel mills glowing red through the permanent haze, and the people who lived there weren't settlers trying to rebuild. They were slaves. Ashur, a former Brotherhood paladin who survived the scourge that bombed the city into glass, built an empire on their backs. He ruled from Haven, the only clean zone in the city, while his raiders dragged workers through the steel yard and the downtown ruins. The air itself was poison, thick with radiation and troglodyte degeneration contagion, TDC, a disease that turned people into feral creatures called trogs over months of exposure. The mills never stopped. Ashur needed steel to arm his raiders, steel to trade, steel to expand, and every ingot cost lives measured in weeks before the sickness took hold. Wildmen prowled the edges, ex-slaves too far gone to remember their names. But Ashur's daughter, Marie, carried something in her blood the scientists couldn't explain, an immunity no one else in the pit possessed. The same sickness that damned the pit held the key to immunity the whole wasteland needed. Out west, the new California Republic kept pushing. By 2281, they'd stretched from Shady Sands to the Colorado River, a nation of 700,000 citizens, with taxes and elections and traffic jams in the hub. President Kimball staked his career on annexing New Vegas, and the NCR sent thousands of troopers to hold the Mojave against Caesar's Legion. What happened at Hoover Dam depends on who you ask. Some caravans swear the NCR held the line and pushed the Legion back across the river. Others claim a courier tipped the balance toward Mr. House and his army of Securitrons, turning the Strip into an independent empire. A few whisper the Legion took the dam, or that the Mojave went truly independent, every faction bleeding out in the desert. The Brotherhood chapters scattered after the Mojave campaign paid no tribute to Lost Hills and answered no distress calls. Elder McNamara's bunker went silent. The Mojave chapter, if it survived, kept to itself. Caravans reported sightings as far east as the Commonwealth. Lone paladins in T-60 armor, scavenging pre-war tech, but no chapter flew the flag openly anymore. The NCR's rangers still patrol the 15, and traders still sell sunset sarsaparilla in Freeside. But no one agrees on who controls the dam, and after 6 years, no unified story emerged from the static. Some stories the wasteland refuses to settle, and maybe that's the point. Vault-Tec built 122 vaults across America, and exactly 17 were designed to save anyone. The rest were experiments, social engineering projects dressed up as survival shelters, each one a controlled variable in a study that would never see peer review. Vault 11 made residents vote to sacrifice one person annually, or the computer would kill everyone. Vault 77 sealed one man inside with a crate of puppets. Vault 81 injected residents with diseases to test cures. Vault 27 was overcrowded by design, double capacity with half rations. Vault 36 had only one food type, and the overseer controlled who ate. Vault 106 pumped psychoactive drugs through the ventilation, 10 days after the door sealed. Vault 112 trapped residents in a VR simulation run by a mad scientist for 200 years. Some vaults opened early, as a test variable. Others never opened at all. The communities that crawled out, Shady Sands, Vault City, Megaton's founding families, survived because the experiments failed or the overseers broke protocol. Vault 13's water chip malfunction saved the future NCR by forcing them outside. Vault 101's isolation doctrine cracked because one kid wouldn't stay put. Vault 76's Reclamation Day worked only because Vault-Tec planned it to. Every vault was a data point in a study no one was left alive to read. Vault-Tec's executives never intended to die in the fire. Internal memos recovered from Appalachia and the capital wasteland paint the picture clearly. The company had a deal with the Enclave, a shadow government planning to ride out the apocalypse on an oil rig and in fortified bunkers. The vaults weren't shelters, they were laboratories, and the data was meant to guide whoever survived long enough to read it. The corporate leadership believed they'd emerge to a cleansed world, armed with centuries of research on stress tolerance, social cohesion, radiation adaptation, and obedience. They'd know which populations broke under isolation, which hierarchies held, which lies people would swallow. The executives saw themselves as architects of a new civilization, one built on the bones of the old and the suffering of everyone locked inside their steel tombs. Most of them died anyway. The bombs were bigger than projected, the fallout worse, and Vault-Tec's own compartmentalization meant half the executives didn't know where the real safe zones were, but not all of them. Some families made it to private shelters, some made it onto Enclave rosters, and some might still be waiting in cryogenic suspension, convinced their investment will pay off. The bombs fell, the vaults opened, but Vault-Tec's shadow never really lifted. By 2287, the new California Republic controls most of the West Coast, with taxes, courts, and a functioning legislature. The Brotherhood of Steel is scattered across chapters that barely speak to each other, some hoarding technology in bunkers, others trying to police the Commonwealth with a stolen airship. The Institute is a crater in Boston, and synths are either free or hunted, depending on which settlement you ask. Appalachia is rebuilding under settler and raider coalitions that cooperate when the scorch beasts fly and kill each other the rest of the time. The Mojave is independent, or Legion-controlled, or NCR annexed, depending on one courier's choices, and nobody outside Nevada knows which ending stuck. The capital wasteland is still picking through metro tunnels for 200-year-old supplies, because agriculture is harder than scavenging. Everywhere you look, communities are fighting over pre-war infrastructure, pre-war weapons, pre-war medicine, Pre-war everything. Nobody's manufacturing new fusion cores at scale. Nobody's laid continental rail. The biggest governments are regional powers with 19th century technology and 23rd century guns. And they're still shooting each other over who gets to claim the ruins. The old world ended because people couldn't share resources or admit they were wrong. The Brotherhood hoards technology because they don't trust wastelanders with power, the same logic that kept nuclear launch codes in the hands of politicians who used them. The NCR expands through taxation and annexation, replicating the imperialism that sparked the resource wars. The Enclave wants genetic purity and considers everyone else contaminated. A fascist endgame that makes the pre-war Chinese internment camps look like a warm-up act. Vault dwellers stumble into the wasteland with no context, forced to pick sides in wars that started before they were born, fixing problems their grandparents didn't create but also didn't stop. They're handed weapons, pointed at enemies, and told this faction is good and that one is evil, when the real answer is that everyone's trying to survive on the bones of a civilization that died because it couldn't do the same. The species that built orbital weapons, that burned through every oil reserve on the planet in 50 years, that turned the entire world into a bombing range over a fuel shortage, that species is still here, still making the same deals, the same compromises, the same threats. The vaults were experiments in human behavior under stress, and the wasteland is the experiment at scale. Every game asks you to rebuild, and every playthrough proves someone will try to burn it down again. Ron Perlman's voice opened every game with the same 4 words: "War never changes." The Great War ended in 2 hours, but the fighting never stopped. The weapons got cruder, the armies got smaller, but the instinct stayed the same. The resource wars burned through nations before a single nuke fell. The Sino-American War killed millions before October 23, 2077, and after the bombs, it just kept going. NCR versus the Legion, the Brotherhood versus everyone, Raiders versus settlers, Vault Dweller versus Vault Dweller. You can put a man in a vault for 200 years, give him clean water and a Pip-Boy, and send him into a world where bottle caps are currency and 2-headed cows are normal. You'll still find someone to shoot. The wasteland didn't create that. It just stopped pretending otherwise. Every faction believes they're different. Every leader thinks they've learned the lesson. And every time, the cycle repeats. Different flags, same war. But maybe that's not the whole story. Fallout has never told you which ending is real. The Courier's choice at Hoover Dam, the sole survivor's decision at the Institute, the Vault Dweller's fate in Shady Sands. Bethesda and Obsidian leave it open because the wasteland isn't one story. It's every playthrough, every choice, every player who decided to save a town or let it burn. You can kill Caesar and watch the Legion collapse. You can destroy the Brotherhood and prove technology doesn't guarantee survival. You can ignore the main quest entirely and just build settlements, trade routes, and something that looks like civilization. The wasteland doesn't stop you. In one timeline, the Minutemen reclaim the Commonwealth. In another, the Institute wins and synths replace half of Boston. In a third, nobody wins, and the ruins stay ruins. All of them are canon, because Fallout isn't about the right answer. It's about what you do when there isn't one. New players boot up Fallout 3 for the first time and step out of Vault 101 into sunlight and rubble. Veterans reinstall New Vegas and try a 4th build with a different karma path. Modders keep Fallout 4 alive with new quests, new factions, new ways to see the Commonwealth. As long as people keep playing, the wasteland keeps finding new ways to surprise us. We started this timeline in 2052 with the resource wars and a world running out of oil. We watched nations collapse, corporations take over, and Vault-Tec turns survival into the cruelest social experiment in history. The bombs fell in 2077, and 200 years later, the wasteland is still sorting through the wreckage. But through all of it, somebody survived. A doctor in Vault 101 raising a kid, a courier shot in the head who got back up, a lawyer who clawed out of a frozen pod looking for his son, a resident of Vault 76 stepping into Appalachia on Reclamation Day. Ordinary people in impossible situations, and somehow they kept going. That's the real story of Fallout. Not the factions, not the technology, not even the vaults. It's the choice to rebuild when burning it down would be easier, to trust a stranger when betrayal is safer, to believe the wasteland can be something better even when 200 years of evidence says it can't. This timeline covers 6 games, dozens of DLCs, and 175 years of in-universe history. But if you want to see it for yourself, there's only one way. Pick a game, pick a build, and walk out into the wasteland. The Pit Boys waiting. From the resource wars to the oil rig's destruction, from Vault 13's water chip to the Institute's synths, from the Master's army to the Pridwin's fall. 2.5 hours, 200 years of history, and we still only scratched the surface. We didn't cover every vault, every faction, every courier's choice, or every ending. The Fallout universe is too big for that, but you've got the spine now, the through line from the old world to the wasteland we know today. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously, not many people sit through a feature-length lore documentary, and you just did. If this helped, or if you're using it to fall asleep for the 3rd night in a row, a like helps the channel. More deep dives are coming. Different games, same calm breakdown, same level of detail. War never changes, but the stories, they keep going. Thanks for walking the wasteland with me.